This person ends up breaking into my home and he kidnaps me early in the morning and takes me to this soundproof bunker. He binds my hands and feet and my mouth. He puts a gag in my mouth and tapes my whole head. And essentially I'm in this 7x7 soundproof room he's created in this storage unit. And he's basically admits he's still in love with me and thinks about me every day. And it's this horrific, I think I'm going to die.
I met Samantha Stites in Chicago. A woman whose story is rooted in pain, but defined by purpose. If you've seen the Hulu documentary, Stalking Samantha, you already know her story. It's a story marked by stalking, kidnapping, and trauma. But what I wanted to capture wasn't just the horror of what happened. It was what came after. Samantha is now using one of the darkest moments of her life to help others heal. And alongside her friend Robin, she's proving that friendship and purpose can rebuild even the most shattered parts of the human spirit. From the moment I met them, they radiated authenticity. Something real, grounded, and whole. And I knew this conversation wouldn't just uncover a story. It would speak to something in my soul.
Yeah. Oh, I was like, there's not room for that.
Mistakes.
Well, this is a little more.
Pictures, seriously?
Yeah.
You guys want pictures?
Yeah, in terms of my story, I was stalked for a long period of time by someone I met in college, just like an acquaintance. And I ended up getting a personal protection order against him, right at the end of my undergrad experience. Ended up moving out of state, and essentially I thought the issue was finished. I didn't really hear from him. I moved out of state. 7 years later, 5 years later, I come back and I start seeing this person again, and the protection order had expired, and this person isn't talking to me anymore, isn't trying to make communication with me, but I'm seeing them everywhere. And I just have this feeling things aren't right. I try to seek another protection order, which gets denied. And this person ends up breaking into my home and he kidnaps me early in the morning and takes me to this soundproof bunker. He binds my hands and feet and my mouth. He puts a gag in my mouth and tapes my whole head. And essentially I'm in this 7x7 soundproof room he's created in this storage unit. And he's basically admits he's still in love with me and thinks about me every day. And it's this horrific, I think I'm going to die. And I end up talking with him through that day, and being able to negotiate for him to let me go. He had planned to keep me there 2 weeks. I don't really know what the end game was. But I was able to convince him to let me go after 13 hours. And I went to the hospital and to the police, and he ended up arrested and sentenced a year and a half later. So he's in prison.
Wow. And for those of you that don't know, there's actually a Hulu documentary that talks about her story. And so if you want the full details and the full dates and everything like that, you can go watch the Hulu documentary. It's called 13 Years of Terror. But today specifically, I really wanted to focus on what drew my attention to Samantha Stites' story was after watching the documentary, I went on her page and I just always want to know what people are up to now after these horrific incidents, and saw that she started an organization that actually helps survivors of tragic incidents like hers. So I really wanted to focus on the work that she's doing now after the incident happened. And so Samantha, we were just talking. You told me that you went to the University of Kansas for your master's program.
I did.
And so what year was that?
I began in like 2017. I did I'm a social worker. I did like an advanced standing kind of accelerated graduate program. So it was shorter in duration, but I did it part-time while I worked. I was also taking care of my grandma during the time. It was a really stressful time in life. But yeah, I lived in Kansas for some time, Kansas City, and then moved back to northern Michigan, where I was from in the end of 2019, early 2020.
Okay. So from 2017 to 2019, was this person still stalking you at that point, or were you?
Not that I was aware of. I discovered his name is Christopher, the guy who was stalking me and abducted me. I found out later on during the investigation that while I was in this like ministry internship in like 2014, 15, he had posed as a woman named Sarah Mott and had made some comments on my blog. We emailed back and forth, and I thought he made up these facts about this Sarah Mott and communicated with me in that way. He made an Instagram profile with a woman's face and some other photos. Sarah Mott. I get a request on Instagram. I don't think much of it because I think, oh, this is that girl that I've been communicating with. And so in that way, he was kind of keeping tabs on me, unbeknownst to me, in that way during those years while I lived out of state.
Okay. But then when you moved back to Michigan from Kansas, that's where everything picked up again.
Yeah. And I thought this was, long gone history. Never thought I'd see this person again. Assumed he had moved on with life like I had. And
yeah. So I guess 2017 to 2019 was kind of like in the documentary you said you went on to do an internship. Was the internship in Kansas? Was that the?
Yeah, I did a ministry internship directly after undergrad. So like 2014, 2015, I worked at a restaurant. I lived in Kansas City. I kind of took a couple gap years and then did my grad program in 2017. So I was just doing other things during that time.
Yeah. How's living in Kansas?
I liked it. I liked some aspects of it. Being from northern Michigan, I miss the snow a lot.
Yeah. You miss the snow.
I miss the snow. I miss the lakes. A lot of those aspects. The heat and humidity was tough for me in the summer. But living in a city like Kansas City was really interesting. So it wasn't like I didn't live like right downtown. It's kind of a sprawling sort of city. I was there when the Royals were really popular and the Chiefs were kind of rising. So it was fun to be in a city that was, as a sports fan too, to experience all of that. So it was kind of a totally different chapter of life for me. And then, I moved back to northern Michigan. I knew I would at some point just because I missed it and it felt like home.
That's home base.
Yeah.
So tell me about your master's program. What exactly did you study?
I have a master's in clinical social work from the University of Kansas. So I had a lot of interests. Social work is one of those like fields that can be really broad. I did my internship at a private practice therapy. So I was someone's therapist essentially for a year or so while I was in my grad program. Which was really cool. I enjoyed it a lot. I also had interest in maybe substance use counseling or working in aging, different things. And with social work, you're like licensed by the state.
Yeah.
So I was kind of needing to continue pursuing licensing in Kansas or Missouri or both, or moving back to Michigan. And instead of like building a whole caseload in that area, I decided to move first and do some other things. And I ended up in a totally different sort of realm. I work in aging now specifically. But when I moved back to Michigan, I did like foster care licensing for like children's foster care homes. And then I found a job in aging that I really enjoy, helping like low income older adults find long-term care solutions and things like that. Still have that interest in doing private practice counseling or therapy at some point maybe, but
Yeah.
obviously this has changed my career trajectory a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of like being in my own therapy and counseling and then potentially doing that for others. I haven't felt like I'm quite ready to
Interesting.
dive in one-to-one with, somebody's potential trauma and
Yeah.
counsel them through that.
As I was listening to one of your podcasts, and which is why I asked you talked about exposure therapy.
Mhm.
So your background is very much in therapy, psychology. You kind of understand something else that was impressive is that you understand the legal system and how it works. A specific part of your story, you talked about how you were trying to preserve evidence so that you can get this guy caught. So all of that again is something that's not typical when people go through these situations. It almost seems like you're always kind of one step ahead, and you're reading situations, you're observing people. So I guess my question is, did you always have an interest in human behaviors and psychology and the field that you're in?
Not initially. I was somebody who really liked science and math. I thought I wanted to like work in the medical field in some way. It was important to me to help others. So I thought that was kind of the initial path I wanted to take. And then I found like someone can be medically well, but their life, they can feel unhappy. And there's a lot of other things. Mental health really interested me. So I kind of ended up actually the first course I took was about child abuse. I don't know how I ended up in that. I think it was technically a sociology course maybe. And it really intrigued me. I thought, here's all these social problems. This seems to be more of a way that I want to make an impact versus someone's physical health. So that was kind of how I ended up in social work.
And that was your first couple years of college?
Yeah, that was in undergrad at Green Valley State. It took me a couple years to figure things out. I started college when I was 17. I was like younger I started kindergarten when I was 4. Just my mom got me in school and was like, had enough. So yeah, I started college relatively young. It took me a couple years to figure out really what I wanted to do. I mean, I was young and I didn't have a lot of guidance growing up necessarily in that realm. So
yeah. So to kind of again backtrack here to get my timeline straight. So from 2011 to 2016 is your undergrad years in Michigan.
I started undergrad 2009 and graduated in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then 2014 to 2016, what were you doing at that time?
I was doing an ministry internship in Kansas City.
Okay.
And then I did grad school
for 2 more years.
2 years, and then I moved back to
so
Michigan.
You spent 4 or 5 years in Kansas.
Yeah.
Okay. And during your internship in Kansas is when I remember on there you also talked about that you found out that he asked you for a ride to your internship. So was he in Kansas at the time too?
We were in Michigan. This was like 2 days before I was leaving to this internship in Kansas City. And, I was packing, I was saying goodbyes, all those kinds of things. And he drives the 2 hours from our college campus where I presumed he was living or staying and finds me in my small hometown and like kind of pulls over in front of me on a motorcycle, and I'm like in a car with my boss who's kind of like a father figure to me, and he asked like, hey, I got accepted to the same internship, can you give me a ride out there? And at this point I had already like zero communication with this person, leaving me alone, anything and everything I could think of, like getting other people involved, like stay away from me.
Yeah.
So that was quite the shock. And that was what prompted me to pursue the protection order at that point.
So that was the first protection order that you got, was in 2014.
Yes.
Okay. And
Excuse me. I've had a
are you good? Are you good? So 2014 is the first protection order, which you said was approved for 6 years.
Yes. And that's a long time, as you probably, I didn't realize it at the time, but 6 years is really long for a protection order.
Uh-huh.
The judge that granted it, I knew his son. I will put that out there, but because it's a small town, there's only so many people in this area. I didn't really know him personally though, and he reviewed what I submitted and was like, "This is textbook stalking, and I think this person is dangerous, and that I think 6 years is appropriate for what I'm seeing here."
Yeah. And I mean, something else I also want to touch on is, as we're talking about the legal system now, is so this protection order gets approved for 6 years. But you're in Michigan at the time and you're moving to Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any thought process in your mind as to, does this protection order valid in Kansas across the
I asked those questions, and I learned that they're state to state. So I assumed that might be enough to deter him, having one in Michigan, knowing I was moving states. If he was still going to show up or appear, I was going to pursue the same protection order, likely in Missouri, because that was Kansas City's right on the state line. So I was living in Missouri. I had planned if I really saw him or had contact with him or whatever, I would pursue that in Missouri as well.
So as you get this protection order approved and you move, what's going through your mind? Are you, you're just hoping that this stops and this solves the problem?
Yeah, I think at this point, I had done all I could do as a person.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the next step to me, is get the legal system involved. I knew at that point with a protection order, if I was seeing him in person, if he was trying to contact me, I knew what the parameters were, that I could contact the police and he would be in violation of that. At that point, I thought that, okay, maybe this is enough to deter him, and motivate him to leave me alone, because now there are legal consequences.
Yeah. And after 6 years in 2020, you assume it expires.
Yeah, I don't even realize it, in fact, because I hadn't seen him. I had lived 5-6 years of life and not really had contact with him that I knew of.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think much of it when I moved back to my kind of hometown area.
Uh-huh. And you moved back in 2019 or 2020?
End of 2019, yeah.
Okay. And then you run across this guy again at a soccer?
Yeah. I joined this, I enjoy playing soccer, and I was, from this area, but essentially I felt like I was new to it because I had been gone for a period of time. I was from a small town. I was living in a slightly bigger city nearby. I was trying to make new friends, that sort of thing. So I joined this adult recreation, competitive soccer league, which was really fun. Challenging during COVID. I mean, we're all wearing masks and there were different rules and things, but I started playing in that, and all of a sudden, Christopher, I see him there, and I had such a physical reaction to that experience. I just, it felt like my heart just sank down to my stomach and out of me. I just was shocked, fearful. I was like, well, why is he here? Is this a coincidence? Or, I didn't know what to think. But it was shocking to see him that first time.
Yeah. And then in your mind, does the protection order automatically kick and play again? Or are you like, oh, is this protection order still active? Or
I looked into it and I had seen that it had expired.
Okay.
So I knew at that point I did some research anyway. You can't like renew it. You've got to reapply if it expires.
Uh-huh.
You can have it extended potentially if it's still active, I think, but it wasn't at that point. So
Yeah.
I would have to reapply. And at this point, I wasn't like just seeing him once wasn't necessarily enough for me to, if he's trying to talk to me, if he's doing the same things he was doing in college, I was absolutely going to pursue that again. But I started seeing him every week at the soccer league, and he never waved. He never approached me to talk. I was another stranger in the crowd. He never appeared to like come with anyone. He didn't seem to really have friends at this league. Like I was kind of making friends and had a consistent team I'd play with, and he would kind of bounce around. He didn't even play soccer was the other thing.
Yeah.
So that was surprising to me, given this sports league had many other sports he could participate in, and he chose soccer.
Yeah.
It was odd to me.
Yeah. And so again, I guess that's another part where I'm like, okay, man, you have a really great understanding of the legal system. So in your head, you're like, all right, I don't have enough evidence yet to reapply for another one, because it doesn't just extend. And I don't have, so you like in your mind, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna play it cool for a little bit and just observe, and see what happens, or what's going through.
Yeah, I couldn't really determine if he was a threat even. I'd assumed after all that time that he had moved on, and that, why would I pursue a protection order if he wasn't going to bother me?
Yeah.
What's the point of that? So I was trying to kind of determine what's the threat here. And I started seeing him more and more frequently. So he kidnapped me in 2022. So over a course of 2 years, well, probably a year and a half, to be honest. I began seeing him more than just at soccer. I started seeing him at the gym I went to, which it's not a huge city. There aren't a ton of gyms, but I started seeing him there regularly. I started seeing him at the grocery store. Sometimes I'd like go to a bar, go out to eat, and occasionally I'd see him. And it just became more and more frequent. And thinking about like other people I know in the city, you may, in that size city, you may run into somebody here and there that
Yeah.
You're not running into the same person over and over again.
Yeah.
And so it started to feel very reminiscent of kind of the end of my undergrad experience, where I started seeing him like between classes. Once I saw him once, I would see him every week after that. And it wasn't necessarily at the beginning of the semester when I was starting class. It would be like 4 or 5 weeks in.
Yeah.
And then I'd start seeing him very similar.
So it was a build up.
Yes.
So build up in undergrad, and then at this, which took about maybe, say what, 3 years or so, when it came to a head, you're like, all right, need to get a PPO.
Yeah, 2.5.
And then in 2020 to 2022, same thing again. Over the course of it, a year and a half, there's a buildup that happens where it just intensifies.
Yeah, except this time he wasn't contacting me. He wasn't, hey, can we talk? It wasn't messages. It wasn't there was no even acknowledgement he recognized me, I thought. I would kind of catch out of the corner of my eye, I would kind of catch him looking my direction sometimes. And so I thought, he recognized him. I looked the same. He had lost a lot of weight. He looked different. I looked the same. Like, there was no way he didn't remember me. So it was just kind of this weird mind game that I was like, okay, well, what am I supposed to, if I call the police, what am I supposed to say? I keep seeing this same person I used to have a PPO against. Well, no, he's not talking to me. He hasn't reached out to me. Like, okay. Like, I was like, I can't go to the police with something like that. Like, what are they going to say? Like,
yeah.
Well, if he starts contacting you.
Yeah. But internally,
it was a mind game. Like, I just didn't know what to think. Like, is this a coincidence? At what point is it not a coincidence? And how is he finding me? Like,
this is a long time. A year and a half is a long time to just internally process all that.
It was, yeah. And I start talking with my friends about it, and, we start looking for like an air tag or something he may have planted on my car
Uh-huh.
somehow. Like, how does he know? How do we keep running into each other like this? Like, I'm trying to switch up my patterns of things, like not having a really consistent routine,
Yeah.
smart things like that. Like
Yeah.
keeping my doors locked. I got a Ring camera on the front of my house.
Did you ever notice him on a Ring camera?
Yes. Well, no, but yes. I was out of town. I was camping with a friend, and I lived in like a kind of quiet cul-de-sac neighborhood. And and this was June or July before he kidnapped me. It didn't look like him though. But it was just somebody walking across the view of the camera at like 4 a.m. through my yard, wearing a hat and just kind of walking across. And I was like, I don't know, is there somebody like drunk in the neighborhood that's stumbling around? It was like a Saturday. To me, it didn't, and it was hard to tell in the video in the dark at the distance he was, if it was him or not.
Yeah.
It crossed my mind, but it was like, I really don't think this looks like him. And I never would have thought he would be at my house in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And he never approached the door, nothing like that. It was just walking across.
Yeah. So you were on edge, and you were strategically watching for his next move, to see where your options are. Now, when does it come to a head when you're like, all right, I need to look into getting another protection order?
It had been kind of in the back of my mind that was always a thing I could try to pursue, but I was like, I know I need kind of enough evidence to convince, a judge to grant this. I was trying to do some research, like, does having a previous protection order give you any advantage to getting another one if your previous had expired and it's the same person? To me, it really seemed like, from picking the brain. I actually played soccer on this rec league with one of the assistant prosecutors in the county I lived in. So I told her about it. My team knew about this person, that he wasn't, I was not walking alone. He was not allowed to play with us.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And she's like, hey, if you want any help with filing a new protection order, just let me know. I'm happy to help if you want. I think just the quantity of times I started seeing him. I had an interaction where I was at this, I was meeting with my friend Carissa, who's in the documentary. She lives out of state. She was visiting for a short period of time. We met at like a brewery it was like a drag show or some, like, I think it was like Pride Month or something going on. And we're like, oh, that would be kind of a cool event in our town to go to and catch up, sort of thing. And I see him there, and he's there alone. There's no, to my knowledge, he doesn't identify with the LGBTQ community. He's in my hometown. This isn't the larger city where I had been seeing him at soccer, where I lived. And it just felt really wrong. I think between that and there was an incident at soccer where he like made this kind of taunting face at me. He just kept trying to get he would try to substitute on the team we would play against, whoever it was. And then I felt like wherever I played on the field, no matter what position I'd play, he'd kind of try to move around the field and be in the same area as me. But we had this incident where we're like both going for a ball at once. And he's pretty fast, so he beats me to this ball. He does this like taunting face where he like sticks his tongue out. And I am just livid. Like, I have to remove myself from the game, and I'm like shaking because I'm like, this isn't right. This is like, I just have this gut feeling that there's something very off, and he's focused on me in some way. For what purpose, I don't know.
And then so you move forward and you apply for
Yeah, I took my teammate up on her offer. I completed all the form. I wrote, I'm a master's level social worker. I'm a good writer. I explained the situation and the times when I saw him and what was going on. I explained some of the background and referenced I had a previous PPO in the neighboring county previously for 6 years with this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, this is communicating this situation clearly.
Yeah.
My friend looks it over, is like, yeah, I'll go up to the clerk and file it with you if you like. So we meet at the courthouse, we go upstairs, we file it. I ask the clerk when we file, I said, if he were to come here and ask if a petition had been filed against him, would you be able to provide him that information? And they say, no, we don't tell people whether somebody's filed a petition against them. If they come up and inquire, that's something that is dealt with through the court. We don't, at our office, we can't say, yeah, somebody's filed something. So I take some peace because I think this person's following me. So I'm like, if he followed me to the courthouse or something or had a suspicion, I'd hate for him to go up and be like, oh yeah, somebody filed a PPO against you. Because I don't know how he's going to react. I have no idea where his mindset is. So that gives me some peace. I file. A few days later, I get a letter in the mail that says, your relationship with this person appears complicated and the ex parte order is denied. So as you know, the ex parte is issuing that order without any court hearing, which was how the first one was done. They provided information that if you would like to appear in court, the petitioner and I guess he'd be like the defendant maybe, could appear before a judge and explain the situation. And I thought, there's no way in hell, I don't know if I can say hell, but there's no way in hell I'm going to potentially appear with this person who I think could be dangerous, potentially doesn't know I'm on to them about the stalking, and with no protection in place, have this conversation with a judge that may or may not grant this order. I was like, it's not fair to put a potential victim in that situation with a perpetrator. Is like, did they have questions about what I wrote? There was no, I was like, well, what do I, short of stalking him to prove he was stalking me, I didn't know what else to do. I was like, I'm going to take more photos. Maybe I'm going to, I kind of had this resolve of I guess I'm going to try to apply again and get more evidence, maybe, if that's what they're looking for. I don't know why this is complicated, but
yeah. So let's pause here for a second. At this point, how is your trust in the legal system? Are you frustrated? Are you?
I remember a lot about the day that I got that letter. I had planned to go kayaking and camping with a friend, and it was an hour drive to where we were meeting. And I was angry. I was scared. It was very frustrating feeling like I had the backing of the legal system previously, and then all of a sudden I didn't. I had some trust, and it just felt like the rug was kind of pulled under me. I was like, I had an assistant prosecutor help me. I had this nagging feeling in my gut, though, that it wasn't going to be approved, just because he wasn't trying to talk to me. He wasn't making real contact with me about seeing him everywhere. And I was like, I don't know, maybe he's smartened up and knows.
Do you think that's what happened? I mean, do you think he was strategic about not contacting you, but just being around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I mean, how does your friend, the assistant prosecutor, react to?
She's disappointed. I honestly don't talk with her much about it because I wasn't sure how to handle it. Because on one hand, I was scared. On the other, I was angry and disappointed, but neither of those emotions were necessarily going to help me solve the potential problem I have on my hands. I'm a very practical person. So I was like, okay, well, how do I kind of took that day and, talked with my friend about it. I was frustrated. We try to have a good day kayaking on the river, and I just feel like now I'm being watched all the time, like, and that I don't have any help.
Yeah.
My friends are getting more and more concerned, and they're pressuring me, like, there's got to be something you can do. You know, what can we, how can we, there's something off. This is not right. And I'm like, I know, but like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah. Yeah. What do the police get involved at, or are they notified?
Other than filing the PPO, I didn't make police reports because I thought, what am I going to report?
They're not gonna.
This person who I don't have a current PPO against, I saw in the store. I saw at a gym. I saw in a public place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, I feel like I had heard enough stories from other survivors, other women in general, and through my career experience at this point, knowing that probably was just going to frustrate me more.
Yeah.
Making reports.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring up a great point. I was looking at your website. You also talk about stalking, but also domestic violence. And I mean, your case, it's not domestic violence because you didn't even know this guy. You didn't want anything to do with this guy. But also the perception, and also sometimes can be the truth. Domestic violence situations specifically are very complicated and complex. And stalking as well. And a lot of times what I've seen happen is, and not all the time, I think there's a lot of good cops out there. There's a lot of great cops out there. Not all the time, but sometimes what I've noticed happen is whenever there's a call that comes out that is domestic violence related, because of the complexity of it and sometimes the perception from a cop, which is wrong, might even be that, oh, you know, they have a relationship. He's going to go back to her or she's going to go back to him. And because of that, I think they don't put in as much work or as much effort as they should in it. And does it happen? Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of cases myself that are domestic violence related to where, you know, I put my 100% in and either he goes back or she goes back to him and the case falls apart, right? And I think a lot of times because of that, cops or anybody else in the legal system get jaded and then they don't put in the best foot forward. But my advice would be, you know, I mean, to any cop or person in the legal system out there, you know, treat every case as its own. You know, you got to put 200% in and follow it through no matter where it leads. But yeah, so I mean, that like just really trying to understand your because you have a background working with the legal system as well as a social worker. So you're saying because of that, you were almost discouraged to even reach out to the police and say, hey, can you at least look out for me? Can you at least look into this? Because I mean, that doesn't sound like it sounds like a valid request. You know, even if I don't have all the evidence, can you at least look out for me? Or can you look into this? Because there's plenty of evidence of the past and what's going on to see this. There's something off here, right? Maybe there's not enough to prosecute a crime, but there's something off here.
Yeah. And I think looking back and knowing what I know now, I kind of wish I would have done that. I think I don't know that people really encouraged me to do that a lot. A lot of it was the PPO, like finding that protection, because then if I was seeing him, I had that option of, you know, he's violating a protection order. But yeah, I think a lot of what really discouraged me was just the previous response I had seen in different situations. And it just felt so silly. Like, am I going to call the non-emergency number and say there's this person who previously was stalking me and now I'm seeing them? You know, I was like, I don't want to waste their time. I don't like, what are they going to be able to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not to say that probably wasn't right, but at the same time, the PPO felt like the key to me to be able to make anything happen.
You're thinking like beyond a reasonable doubt, right? I mean, that's kind of from what I'm hearing. It sounds like you're thinking, man, beyond a reasonable doubt. If like you're a practical person, you're like, unless I have hardcore evidence, then I'm not gonna bother the police with this versus, man. So what would be your message to anyone listening out there? Like, make the call or what?
Make the call. Yeah, pursue what you need to in terms of getting peace. Reach out for help. I feel like I did that to some degree. I had reached out to the soccer league organizer, even had a meeting with him. I was like, here's this situation. Like, is there anything you can do to keep him off the same field as me or to not allow him to play? Like, what is there anything you can do? And essentially he was like, no, which I get it.
Yeah.
But it was just like everywhere I was met, I felt like it was just discouragement after discouragement. And it really kind of made me feel like I was on my own in terms of solving the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And this story and a lot of stories, hearing that perception really does, it makes me sad, because recently in Broward County, Florida, we had a situation where it's always a buildup, right? I mean, it's a buildup of these things happening, and one day it comes to a head. And recently, probably a few months ago, it was a domestic violence situation to where the victim had reached out multiple times, and there was no help, and she ended up losing her life because of that situation, her and her father. And, I mean, the sheriff was rightfully very upset, and a lot of officers and deputies got fired over the handling of this case. I mean, so you started this organization, and that's helping people navigate this. It seems like you've been doing a lot of advocacy work. I mean, how can we improve this system, or how can we do better?
I certainly have some suggestions based just on my own experience. One being some sort of common system that the public or police can use to find this information. I didn't know until after I had been abducted that he had another woman, I don't know, 2010, somewhere in there, before I even met him, had filed a PPO against him, had called the police. He continued. Nobody knew that until this horrific crime took place. I was never told about that. That's something that would have informed my decision making, I think, earlier on to pursue a PPO earlier, or had I included more of that information in my PPO request, if anyone else had known about it, would that have changed some of the decision making? I don't believe that my request was even really considered by the judge, to be honest. In the county I resided, they have referees that are not appointed by the public that serve as kind of assistants to the judges. They do a basic review of protection orders and give some feedback to the judge, and ultimately the judge is to make the decision. And I really don't think that happened in this situation. I don't think that my request was reviewed. I think a referee looked and said, this seems complicated. Didn't look into my previous PPO, didn't look up his information, because I think it would have resulted in a different determination. So I think that's one thing that could change in terms of access to that information. I get that having a PPO on record, to my knowledge, doesn't mean that you violated a law. It's not something that's going to follow your record necessarily, I don't think. But having access to that information can inform somebody's decision making in terms of this is a pattern. Stalking itself is a pattern.
Yeah.
Domestic violence is a pattern. Any of these types of behaviors that continue, it doesn't mean it's going to stop with one victim. In his situation, there was another woman that's featured in the documentary as well that he had stalked her before even meeting me. And I think knowing that information is important. I like to use the example of drunk driving. So, and I'm not a law enforcement officer, but my understanding is when you're drunk driving, you get pulled over, the officer can look at your record at the stop while you're there and say, no matter where you are in the state, they can say you've done this previously too. This is potentially a second charge. They can see that information. And I would imagine that potentially that's treated slightly differently than somebody who doesn't have any. I mean, I'm not a law enforcement officer. That's just my opinion as a person, my understanding of how it works. But to my knowledge, nobody knew about this previous stalking situation with him. Why is that information not more readily accessible?
Yeah, I mean, specifically the court system, maybe
especially the court system.
That's interesting, and I'm not too, that's a lot of the information side of things where there's criminal intelligence analysts and that oftentimes we'll call it into dispatch and say, hey, give me the history of this person, or we'll look it up during an investigation, during a thorough investigation. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this is just information that needs to be out there, needs to be front page, and that probably would have changed the outcome of the approval of that PPO order.
Not that a piece of paper is going to stop somebody. And he was dead set on what he had planned for me, it sounded like. I don't think a piece of paper would have stopped him. I think along the way, for most people that are stalking, there's all these opportunities to say, okay, I'm going to back off. When the victim says, leave me alone, they get another person involved. Sometimes that's enough to stop somebody.
Yeah.
Deter the behavior. Maybe they move on to somebody else. Maybe they don't. There's all these steps along the way for people to kind of stop. And to me, a protection order is a pretty hefty barrier to have to cross. Like now you're potentially facing jail time, fines, things on your record for stalking, and much more likely to pursue actual stalking charges, which carry more heavy penalties. So to me, it's like, these are all little opportunities that perpetrators have to rectify behavior. And
well, so my question to you on this too is on topic of information sharing in law enforcement and in the justice system, heck, with the public. I mean, something like there's new things I found out all the time too. For a long time, I didn't even know that you could look up an offender online. That's something I found out as a cop 2 years ago. I was like, man, why is this not more publicized? Hey, you can even look online. Hey, do I live around a child predator within my area? Those are things that are just not publicized. There's a lot of clerk of court websites to where you can look up public information about anybody, the last ticket they got, so I guess just a side question, do you think there should be more of that? Or do you think there's an invasion of privacy to some people that may be trying to change their life that should be protected also? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a fine line. I mean, obviously, I would want my information to be protected. But at the same time, if I've violated a law or, something that potentially endangers other people.
Yeah.
Drug use, not necessarily affecting other people, sexual assault, child pornography, other types of things that interfere with others. I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
Knowing about your neighbors. I do that everywhere I've moved, is check up and just at least know.
Yeah.
Previous place I lived, there was somebody on the registry. And they made me aware of that as well. And it was one of the best neighbors I had in terms of relationship. And, I knew this about them though. So it was I was never gonna necessarily invite this person into my home, but or have them watch my house while I'm gone or whatever. But in terms of I didn't treat that person any differently. It helped inform decision making potentially, but, I think information is power, especially when you're talking about victims of things like that. There's always an opportunity to change ways. And maybe there is a time period where, this was 30 years ago and I don't have anything else, besides that one incident. I think it's a fine line.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, for me, I'm always, the more information, the better. You know, the more information, the better. I remember I pulled over some guy for something, and he was just acting really weird. And when I got on the on dispatch, I'm like, yeah, man, this guy just got out for murdering somebody, and they're watching him. I'm like, oh, you know, that's really good information to know. I'll wait for backup before I go talk to this guy. But the more information, the better, right? And but I also saw on your website you're doing a lot of work on advocacy. Have you seen any progress?
Yeah, so I started Beekeepers Advocacy with my friend Robin. As somebody who's like a social worker, I'm like going through something like this and being somebody. So I feel like social work and probably law enforcement is like one of those professions that it's not just a profession. Like maybe you have a tendency for certain values and that informs why you ended up in that field, but the field itself changes you.
Yeah.
And for me, social work is kind of like that. Like as a social worker, I'm advocating for vulnerable people. I'm working to bring about social change, even if it's a small thing with an individual. And I wanted to do something to get my story out there to provide hope to others. I know that there's so many people that never have that opportunity because they are killed. They don't survive whatever they're going through, which I think is a very heavy but real topic. I'm very thankful to be here. Part of it is sharing my story and getting people talking about stalking. It's not talked about a lot. It's featured in film, in shows. It's romanticized in some ways, I would say, but it's not something that people talk about a lot. And there's a lot of shame often associated with it, even though in most cases the victim's done, nothing wrong. Being able to talk about it, I've had so many people come forward of like, I just never knew what to do, or, I felt shame about it, or I had orders denied and I, didn't pursue anything further. Or most people can identify with, I hear a lot, like the way I approach people is different now after hearing this. Like most people can identify with like being asked out by somebody they're not interested in, and changing their response to be a little bit more firm instead of maybe just dismissing it, or maybe another time, especially if somebody they're not interested in or kind of have an ick about, a bad feeling about. A lot of people will say like, this has made me look at this differently in terms of boundaries and communications. I mean, stalking is a repetitive boundary violation.
Yeah.
And being able to see how people respond to that, that potential crossing of boundaries, helps people make better decisions of, I'm not even going to go on a date with this person.
Yeah.
Or, there's something off here. So for me, a lot of it has been like sharing my story. It's been providing information about stalking and the effects. I mean, PTSD, sleep issues, financial cost. There's so many things that go into stalking that it takes years to recover from, and leaves a permanent impact on someone. So I think that's not something that's always realized too. A lot of folks think like, oh, well, the stalking has stopped, or the person's in jail, or they've moved on, so everything's good with you now. And those things stick with you. You trust people differently, you interact differently. It just changes the way you see things. And that's not something people realize. So I think, doing speaking engagements, talking with the public, in terms of awareness is huge. When folks reach out looking for resources, providing those. I'm not doing like, in-depth consultations or therapy with survivors. At this point, I still work full-time at a separate job. This is like something I'm doing that I hope to do more of. But in terms of awareness and hope to bring some sort of legal change, I'm hoping to work with law enforcement and the judge specifically in Antrim County is very interested and willing to try to, what can we try to push for in terms of legal changes with this, and being a resource for that. And I think there's a lot that advocates in law enforcement can learn from a victim's perspective as well. So a lot of that is kind of what Beekeepers Advocacy is about. I'm hoping as things grow that, more survivors are, interested in participating and kind of joining the fight, so to speak.
Okay, so Samantha, you talked about your work with beekeepers and the mental toll, something you just touched on. Well, two things you touched on. First is you talked about that stalking is not talked about often and it could be romanticized. One thing that stood out to me specifically in the documentary was the mention of the show You. Okay, and that's on Netflix, and it was a hit show, and people actually like that show. What are your thoughts on that show?
My thoughts now or my thoughts when I watched it?
I want to hear both.
Both.
Yeah.
I watched You when it came out. I thought it was interesting. I watched it as most people did with the idea of this person is sick and twisted. This person who in You, this rather good looking younger guy, essentially stalks and like kidnaps women. He ends up killing some of them, I think. I wasn't able to finish watching the show because I was abducted in the time period. So that was just not something I wanted to watch the last season of. But in this show, I mean, I think a lot of things about it are kind of realistic. But anyway, my thoughts about it were, I watched it thinking this person is sick and twisted. Christopher admitted he watched the show and it inspired him. Like he could identify with this character that's being featured as a stalker and someone who kidnaps and murders people. He got this idea for this soundproof bunker from that show. In the show, he makes this sort of glass space room and keeps the woman in it. And you think about people with mental illness and seeing those types of shows, they have a completely different idea watching that than what the general public does. And so in some ways, I think it's troubling. I obviously didn't think about that watching it initially. I'm able to say, obviously, this is a made up show. This person is obviously very sick and this is wrong and blah, blah, blah. And it's entertainment. So kind of from hindsight view, there's people that watch shows like that and identify with like, I'm obsessed with somebody in that way. And there's somebody else who's doing, and this person's good looking and it works out for them or whatever it may be. And in some ways it kind of gives them permission to act out those thoughts, feelings, etc.
Yeah.
Which is troublesome. I'm not saying don't make shows like that. It's not going to happen. People are going to do that. But I think conversations around those types of shows need to be different.
Yeah. And I think the lead actor did come out and spoke about that, hey, this character is a sick and twisted person. And I don't know how to phrase this, because in the show, it almost seems like you said, he's a young, good-looking dude, and is it romanticized? Do they almost make you feel like engaged a little bit too much with the character, with the lead character? Do you almost feel like, man, this guy just wants love? I don't know. So there's a lot of ways that sometimes shows can be spun to where you're like it gets you engaged and it's entertainment. But I mean, for example, for the first season, all the way along up until the end, I was like, man, this guy is trying to find love. And then at the end, you're like, what the heck? This is really weird, right? So it's like there's the pacing of the character development. I think could be a little bit dangerous, because it at first it doesn't scream, this is a sick and twisted monster. You see monsters out there, you say, oh, this is how a monster looks. Yep, that's weird, that's awkward, and that's off. Versus this guy's like super calm and super chill. So yeah, you're right. There's conversations for sure that I think are important to have around that.
I think people are complicated. People are complex. Like, I think it's easier for us to be able to say, this is a bad person. They did an awful thing. They're in prison, or whatever it may be. Or these are good people. Life is more complicated than that. Like, Christopher certainly started the same way. He was interested in me. He was looking for love. I have sympathy for him in some ways, but obviously there comes a point where you cross a line and it's very problematic. I would say, obviously he's in prison now. He did some awful things to me specifically. Is he still a person? Yes. Did he probably have good intent to start? Probably. Did people think of him as a monster? Well, probably not until he did what he did. People are complicated, and I think that's an interesting aspect of talking about those shows, where it can also give people sympathy for others they see that they want to label as monsters or sickos or, things like that, which I think is interesting. I feel like that's one aspect that maybe I could kind of get behind, is like, people deserve second chances in some ways, but at the same time, just what are the conversations about these types of shows? I don't know. It's kind of a unique perspective. As a social worker, I feel like too, I'm always like, people can change. Do I feel like Christopher can change? Personally, no. Because this went on for so long. The judge didn't think he could either, due to that's why he sentenced him essentially to life. So I don't know. I think the public is quick to judge, and there's a lot of interesting conversations that could be had from some of these shows.
So one question for you. What is, as an observant, practical person that you are, how do you balance those two worlds of, man, I don't want to be quick to judge, but also my spidey senses are tingling here. Something's not right.
Yeah, I think in terms of day to day, obviously now in like terms of my own healing, I react way differently than I used to after all of this. Like certain noises, a solicitor coming to my door to tell me about their roofing company, for example, like, I have such a visceral sort of reaction to situations like that, like meeting new men that I'm not familiar with. Anybody who shows like romantic interest, I get very leery of. Like, I just behave differently. I don't think this was necessarily your question.
No, it is completely my question.
But I think it's changed a lot of the way I approach the world. And I would say I'm a lot more hesitant than what I used to be. It's a lot of like balancing of like, okay, this person is coming to my door. They're not going to be kidnapping me, most likely. Unfortunately, I had that experience, which taints the rest of every time a stranger comes to my door, or I hear an unexpected noise, or I have an interaction in a public place with somebody who becomes upset with me. Somebody's yelling at me or honking their horn while I'm in the crosswalk, or like at a concert. I had a negative experience this summer, and it affected me for days. Like, before it would have been like, well, that was annoying. That guy was an idiot. Like, whatever. You kind of like talk about it, you dismiss it, you move on with life. Like, I hold on to that for a lot longer, and I feel a lot more fear and hesitancy I was like, I didn't go anywhere the rest of the weekend. I was like, I'm staying at home. I just want to do my own thing. I don't trust or want to interact with other people. There's, days of good and bad like that kind of come. And I think when you've been through something traumatic like that, the way you respond changes. It just is. And over time, that gets better. I'd say even over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of improvement, but a lot of it is work and exposing yourself to those and working through those emotions and correcting your thought patterns in a lot of ways to kind of be able to even have this conversation. I think having a male approach me about an interview about this topic, obviously we're here in person, there was travel involved. There's that hesitancy of like, well, is this safe? Those kinds of things that I think about just a lot more than what I would have before.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking us through the healing journey and what it's looked like over the past couple of years. And you talked about exposure therapy. What does that look like, or what's?
Yeah. So I chose to do exposure therapy. And obviously having been a therapist myself, I kind of knew what treatments could be available for PTSD, and I knew what I wanted in a therapist. And I found a therapist that did exposure therapy that I was a great fit for me in terms of personality and things like that. So much of it is about that relationship with a therapist in a professional manner. And exposure therapy is a lot of like, some of it is rehashing actual events so that you're not quite as elevated as on edge, and making it more of a regular experience, and also working to not avoid things. A lot of PTSD is avoidance. It's one aspect of it. So exposing yourself to things you may be avoided. Like for me, a lot of my work was about bedroom doors being open a crack. When I was abducted, I had my bedroom door open a few inches and I could see a shadow. And that was a lot of the most frightening part of the whole experience, was that initial attack in my bedroom. And so a lot of exposure therapy was like for a long time, I would have multiple locks on my door. I would have like my bedroom door. I would like sleep with a weapon. I was terrified to be in my bed. So a lot of exposure therapy in the beginning was like, it's going to be before you go to bed, but you're going to lay in bed with your door open and a light on outside. And then it was moving closer and closer to having a door just a bit open with nothing else on the other side. And eventually it was, you're going to sleep without multiple locks on your door, like things like that, kind of making it so that the world is a more open place. So you can do that with any particular stimuli that's troubling to you. So I did that with a lot of things that were giving me trouble in day-to-day life, specifically. And it was really helpful. I think in a lot of ways it helped. And a lot of it is talking through the experience too, and getting a better understanding and making it less frightening, and being able to like incorporate it into a day-to-day life and kind of move on emotionally from it. Obviously, it's still an emotional story for me. But that's kind of what exposure therapy was like for me.
Do you recommend that for anybody, or is it specific to?
I think it can be used for other things. I know it's used a lot for PTSD and like avoidance. I mean, obviously it would be something somebody would want to talk to a therapist or a provider about if it could be a good fit for them. It was for me. A lot of folks do like EMDR for PTSD, which wasn't something I wanted to do for this in particular. I did an EMDR in the past for another experience, but yeah, there's multiple different options. And I think if you're looking at therapy for getting over trauma or PTSD or whatever it may be, like knowing what options are out there, and before you just dive into something, learn what it's going to be like, how it will be helpful and what the process looks like. I knew a lot of that kind of going in. and being able to see that something could be a good fit for you before just jumping in.
Yeah. So what does healing look like in the day-to-day now?
Day-to-day now, I try to keep good boundaries about like how much time I spend on different activities. Like I get messages every day from people that were like, I watched Stalking Samantha, and they're overwhelmingly positive. Every now and again, I get those like, well, it wasn't rape because you said like, because you said you agreed to do it.
You actually get those messages?
I got one last night.
Wow.
Yeah. I've had those before. Which I'm like, whatever. I just delete it and move on with my life. But overwhelmingly the response has been very positive. But like limiting how much of it, especially as we get closer to bedtime, because I still do struggle with nightmares and sleep, was a lot of my symptoms and why it was tough for me to return back to work. Like I was just terrified at the night and the morning hours and things like that. I'd wake up at weird times, couldn't fall back asleep, those types of things. So I do a good job to like protect my time as best I can before bed of like trying to do things related to therapy or talking with victims or working through things related to my story, not right before bed. For example, some of it is like just my own, like, I need certain time for myself to feel recharged and not on edge, or taking time to like journal and process, I think is a big thing. And just also having a good amount of time to do things that are about my normal life, like spending time with my pets, going snowboarding, like things that make me kind of out of my head and more into my body. Because there is such a disconnect with like sexual assault and trauma in terms of feeling dissociation versus feeling in your body. So I try to, healing practices may look like trying to engage more in like physical activity or yoga. And that's something I still struggle with. I was a very active sort of person, and I've struggled to kind of get back into normal workout routines or like things within my body. And I think healing, obviously it waxes and wanes. And sometimes it looks like I went for a walk today and I was present during the walk in my body and in my surroundings.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question I have for you is specifically another thing I immediately noticed when you were talking about the beginning of this story in the documentary was you said you met him in your freshman year, this outreach group. I assume it was a faith-based outreach group or a Christian club. So tell me about, so you were probably really involved, I assume, in this faith group.
I didn't grow up with any sort of faith or religion or anything, but I found this faith group toward the end of my freshman year, sophomore year. I met Christopher, I think, did 5 years, so I always get confused. It must have been my third year that I met him, so 2011-ish. But yeah, this faith group was a really important part of my college experience. I don't know if you finished your question. I think I interrupted you.
No, well, you kind of took me through it and you helped me develop my question. And so you met him and you got really involved in this faith group, and then you met Christopher there. Man, how has this experience affected your faith journey? Do you tie it back to this incident, back to meeting him there? If I never met him there, this would never happened. Or I guess walk me through.
Yeah, those are tough thoughts to tease out. Like, man, how would my life have been different if I hadn't met him, or like hadn't been in this group? Like, I just feel like the trajectory of my life changed pretty drastically through this group, and it was a lot of the reason how I ended up finding social work. But yeah, meeting him there, that's also a heavy, like, there was a lot of good things that came from it, but like this really awful thing happened through kind of this group, so to speak, I guess. I don't know. It's changed. My faith has evolved, obviously, as everyone's spirituality or faith does through their lives and things they experience. It definitely gives me a lot of like why questions, like, why me? Why this? Like, I think a lot of times when you are, I guess in Christianity, maybe I'll limit it to that. There's kind of this perception of like, well, if I believe in God, good things will happen. Good things come to those who believe. And I think, wow, there's been a lot of really awful things that have happened to me. My mother's passing and my grandmother's passing was really difficult. And then this whole experience, which stemmed from a Christian group, like I met him there. So it's kind of tough to tease out. I think a lot of ways my faith kind of helps keep me grounded. But it changes because I feel like I sense all of these things. I personally feel like I keep faith in God at a distance more than I did previously. Just because there's no good answer. Like why do bad things happen to good people? I think I'm a good person. I think most people think they're good people. There's no good answer. Like there's the pat answer, which I got sometimes at church, which was like, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. Like awful answer to give to somebody. Like, there's no good answers. And I don't know that other than finding your own purpose through a trauma or difficult circumstance, like there's no guarantee you could go through something and not do anything, gain anything positive from it. It's not a bad thing. You can make it into something different. And I feel like that's a lot of what I've tried to do is like, what good can come from this? Like, I have to be the driver of the good. It's not just going to fall into your lap sometimes. And I don't know. I feel like my faith has changed a lot through these experiences and just my own beliefs and ideas. And I don't like to be necessarily looped into being called a Christian because I think there's a lot of things I don't attend church regularly. For some people, they think that's being a Christian or having certain values. To me, I feel like because I believe in God and Jesus, I am a Christian, I think. A lot of what I feel like is right and wrong in I have kind of strong ethical, I don't know, compass. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram personality test too. So I'm a 1. So like my whole get it done, very like action oriented, can be perfectionistic and critical, but like I'm a very good and bad is something that weighs on me a lot and like very motivated to do good things. And my basic fear is that I'm going to be bad. I think is what it is. But so for a lot of I don't know, my faith goes into all of that, I think, but it's complicated.
Complicated.
It's complicated. Still working it out.
Yeah. Do you associate, thinking about going to a Christian group or a Christian gathering, and I've been to Christian gatherings and there can be some awkward people there. And from what you're saying, Christopher was the awkward guy in the Christian group and who you were being nice to, and he got this weird obsession with you. But going through to Christian groups now, do you have kind of
I don't.
Okay.
I don't go to church. I have friends that are Christians. I don't have, say, especially while I was in Kansas City, I had some pretty negative experiences with people. I feel like people that could be identified as Christians. I've had some of the best people I've ever met, and some of the people I hold dearly. And also most of the experiences really negative experiences I've had with people, are also Christians. So I'm like, I just don't. I feel like for me, it's a personal thing. It's not so much, I don't necessarily want to be looped into a group of, I know great people that are Christians. I love talking about faith conversations or the Bible or whatever life with. But in terms of group settings, not usually something I'm keen about for various reasons. But that's just my own journey too.
Yeah. Well, speaking of friends and groups though, someone that whenever I contacted you, you said, man, can Robin come and she's been a part of this. I was like, man, heck yes. I really want to hear the story of how you guys worked with beekeepers. But not only that, I mean, the fact that she was kind of somebody you thought of, it's like, man, that must be a close relationship. And I really want to understand a little bit more about the relationships that also helped you navigate this process. Because, I mean, it's just looking at just meeting the two of you guys, I was like, man, you could tell there's a strong bond there, and I want to explore that a little bit more. So we'll bring out Robin to just talk a little bit more about beekeepers and her friendship with Samantha. One thing that stood out to me, Samantha, about your story was I saw multiple faces on there. There were a few of your friends that also talked about your story and also stepped in to help you out to the point where Christopher even started tracking your friends as well. And so you didn't go through this alone. And that was inspiring to see how your friends showed up for you. So with us today, we actually have Robin, which is one of your friends who helped you to found Beekeepers Advocacy. So tell me a little bit more. How did this friendship start?
Well, Elk Rapids is a small town, so we were at least aware of each other forever. But when I was a freshman and Sam was a senior, we were on the same soccer team. So that's kind of how we met and became friends. I think one of the players had a sleepover, and Sam and I just were sitting on the bed together, probably being super annoying to everyone else because I think we just talked until like 5 a.m. about a bunch of stuff. And then we're like, I think.
What do high schoolers talk about until 5 o'clock in the morning?
Childhood trauma.
Boys. Just kidding. Mostly childhood trauma.
Yeah, it was
childhood trauma. So, I mean, that was a bonding moment for you guys, was trauma.
Well, her trauma.
Okay. I mean, so at this point, you're a senior in high school. Mm-hmm. And so I assume you're 17, you're 16. You graduated at 17.
Yeah, I was 17 by the spring. Yeah.
Okay. So you were 17 and you were 13.
14, 15.
Okay. So you guys spend all night together and you talk until 5 o'clock in the morning. Is this a friendship made in heaven right away? I mean, you guys.
I mean, I would say that's kind of like the start of when we became like actually like friends where you hang out and stuff like that. Because I feel like being able to hold a conversation with someone is rare, especially until 5 a.m. So that's one of those things.
Yeah. But moving forward, though, I mean, this is an interesting question I have, because by your sophomore year in college, you're 18, 19, 2 years after you meet Robin. And this is when Christopher gets into your life. And at this point, you're still in high school. Mm-hmm. I mean, how are you guys processing what's going on? Again, I haven't been in high school for a long time, so I don't know the mindset of a high schooler to be able to recognize, is this a dangerous situation, or like, talk me through the friendship during that time while you're still in high school and while this is going on.
Well, I think something that's kind of terrifying about, I guess, stalking and how under discussed it is this was going on with Sam. But it was kind of just like, oh, this guy is following me. He's being annoying. I don't think any of us really appreciated the severity of it. Like it was kind of at some point just like a joke. Like, oh, this guy that just won't leave me alone.
Overweight, awkward guy just keeps trying to shoot his shot, and I just keep
won't get the message.
Blocking it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like retrospectively, it's like, oh wow, that was not the correct way to handle it. But I think it's so much easier to kind of brush things off than to really be like, oh, your life is in danger right away. Because that's so heavy, and I don't think that's how any of us really want to spend our lives, like processing
Yeah.
interactions with people.
Yeah. So it was a casual conversation, and something you brought up earlier, Samantha, was boundaries, and I think that's something that's not talked about enough, at a young age when you're in high school or when you first get to college. You're a little bit more outgoing, you want to see the world and meet as many people as you can and more open to that. I mean, so I guess take me through looking back now, what, especially in high school, being probably a junior at the time, what you were thinking then and what you're thinking now, from hearing Samantha's story or when she was talking to you about this.
So I think at the time it was, as I said, just something that wasn't taken super seriously until he showed up in Elk Rapids. Then that was when I think everybody was like, this is really creepy. When he showed up in Elk Rapids the first time before her internship is what I mean. Because obviously that's not normal behavior. And I think fortunately, Craig Mosier was able to, as an adult, kind of have this outside perspective of like, hey, this is really, really dangerous. And that voice, I think, kind of made Sam
sobering.
Yeah,
for
it
all
was.
of us.
Yeah. And so she got the PPO, and we thought that was just the end of it. And I think if you watch the documentary and then you see Chris return, you don't really appreciate how long it was where we just thought he was gone. Like, what was it, 6 years or something?
2014 to about 2020, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a long time. So when Sam sees him for the first time, I think all of her friends are concerned, but I think it's very reasonable to be like, oh, this could be a coincidence, which was Sam's first thought.
Any reasonable person, 6 years, you would have seemingly no contact. Somebody would have moved on. So like,
right.
But we're not talking about a normal, rational person.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so that was like me, Carissa, and Pat, all of us are in the documentary. We're having like these text conversations behind Sam's back, essentially. I know. I mean, like, she needs to file a new PPO, or putting a lot of pressure on her to do that. And Sam is a very logical person, and she's saying, like, no, I don't have enough evidence. He's not talking to me. He's not communicating with me. This could just be a coincidence. And, in our minds, we're like, it's definitely not. But turns out she was right, because, the PPO was declined. But there was a lot of panic on our end and frustration with Sam. But Sam also was, you were right the whole time.
And you guys were at a distance too. Like, we also weren't all living in the same spot. Like, Robin and I would see each other in the summers more often. But a lot of my close friends, we all lived in different cities. We weren't like right there. So I think part of that was kind of challenging too.
Yeah, like because like listening now to you saying that you'd see him at the gym and the grocery store and things like that, those weren't things that she'd even told me. Because I don't know, I'm sure you didn't want to spend your day being like, guess who I saw for the 14th time today. So a lot of that was actually news to me. It was like the major events, like when he showed up at the Schwartz, the Pride event, and the soccer and all of that. Those were like the red flags for me.
Yeah. Samantha, earlier when you were talking about your friends were pressuring you, it gives a different light having Robin here actually talk about that. I didn't realize it was like, hey, Samantha, like, you need to do that. So when he said the word pressure, I didn't realize how heavy that was. So, I mean, walk me through that. What do the text messages look like from you to Samantha, or from your other friends to Samantha?
Well, Sam was very frustrated with us, which is understandable, because you're going through this super stressful situation that you're processing in your head, and you're trying to figure out the best course of action. And then you have people on the outside being like, you need to do this. And while you're very much trying to figure it out yourself. So I understand the frustration with that.
It's like,
But-
Cinderella do this, Cinderella do that, and these are not. Don't just get a PPO. Like,
Yeah.
that's a whole thing. Like,
And I remember when you said that the PPO was denied, I felt so much guilt because I was like, oh, like we all told her to do that. And then she was right the whole time that it wouldn't get approved, which is ridiculous, by the way. But yeah, so there's conversations, with Chris or whatever, just kind of thinking of, I remember one text Chris said was like, I feel like Sam is trying to be stalked, which she was correct about because, I mean, Sam didn't have any evidence once her PPO was declined. She was trying to build evidence. And how messed up is that you are like literally trying to be stalked to protect yourself? Like it was very confusing, hard to navigate situation.
I think another aspect that there was a lot of like clash about was like, I think Carissa was more frustrated about this, but she's like, if you're seeing him at the soccer league, quit this soccer league. And I'm like, why should I have to change my life? And also, this is like how I'm making friends. This is like my social outlet. This is like a good physical exercise. It's something I enjoy. And also, if he's stalking me here in a safe public area, what if he just finds some other way to get a hold of me and not such a seemingly safe place? So to me, it was kind of like, I don't want to give up. I shouldn't have to give up my freedom of something I enjoy that's very beneficial to me. And also the fear of like, which I didn't really tell her at the time, but the fear of like, well, this is also like a safe place. There's people I know that are looking out for me and it's a public area. If he has to come see me, I'd rather it be there than in a dark parking lot or showing up at my house or, other places. So that I remember that being a tough conversation to have because I'm like, well, I feel like I'm not, in some ways, I feel like I'm not protecting myself. But in the same way, I was like, I think I kind of also had that inclination of like, this is a safer place for him to get his fix and see me in this setting than what it could have been other places. So,
and also the reality is like we didn't know it at the time, but the extent of his stalking was so severe. No matter what Sam did, he would know where she was.
We could not have guessed in our wildest dreams that he had tracker. Like we couldn't even find the police couldn't even find the trackers on the vehicles. It like took several attempts lifting them up at a mechanic to actually find the things. So it wasn't just like,
yeah, the detective showed up to Sam's place after this, and he was so frustrated. He was like, he will not tell me where the trackers are. I can't find them. He was like so angry about that. But yeah, because I remember I told you, do you want to drive my mom's car for a while so that, if he is stalking you or tracking your car, then, it's a different car. And you'd said the same thing. You're like, I'm not trying to change my whole life for this person, which is very normal to not want to do. And retrospectively, it wouldn't have mattered. He knew where she lived.
He would have put a tracker on that car.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. So how often are you guys talking throughout this time?
It escalated for sure. There was when you first showed up at soccer, and then it was just kind of like, hey, just so you know, my stalker's back. And then
What was your reaction to that?
I think I probably called Carissa right away and to kind of process, like, do you think this is as messed up as I do? Because I think Sam at the time didn't quite accept how weird that was.
You want to hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was like put us on alert for sure. And then he really seemed to ramp up his interactions with Sam the closer it got to the abduction, where the conversations were more and more frequent leading up to October. But
until I filed the PPO, and then seemingly I stopped seeing him so much. And so at this point, I was also trying to like get more photographic evidence or other things to like prove to the police, I think this guy's stalking me, to like refile for the PPO. And he kind of lays off because he told me while he abducted me, he's like, I went to the courthouse and I asked if somebody filed, and I still to this day have no idea if this is true, because he did have a tracker on my car. He would have seen that I was at the government center where the courthouse is. He could have inferred, but he said, no, I went up to the clerk and I asked if somebody filed, and they said, yes, they did.
And the thing that like makes me believe that is with all of the conversations that she had with him in the bunker, he seemed like he was really proud of everything that he did. So it really seems as though I think from the outside perspective, you'd be like, oh, well, you can't trust this person at all. But it seems like he was quite honest, and most things that he said checked out.
Yeah, there were other things. There really wasn't anything with me, conversations I had with him. He lied to the detectives in the initial interview, but with me, everything he told me checked out. So
that's problematic.
I still don't know. But from that, I think he was like, oh, I need to lay off. But at this point, now he was focused on building this bunker. He spent, for after July when I filed the second PPO, he kind of chilled out in some ways. But behind the scenes, he was spending all his spare time building this $5,000 soundproof bunker in a storage unit. So, I mean, he was still rather invested in just a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever contact Chris?
No, I am actually, this makes me a little bit salty for just own personal reasons, but I never actually interacted or, to my knowledge, saw him. I knew what he looked like from college pictures, but I think even if I saw him face to face, I would have never recognized him based off of college photos because he was lost so much weight. He looked like a different person. But no, I never talked to him. I never saw him.
Surprising given all the time we spend together. I feel like of Carissa, Robin, and Pat, Carissa and Pat had both had confrontations with him during the summer prior to the abduction. And I spent less time with them than I did with Robin. So it's kind of interesting that they just we happened to see him and have one of those events where we were out somewhere that, why the heck is he here? And they confront him.
Yeah, and there's definitely like guilt on my side of like, well, he was definitely around. You could, if you listen to some of the court stuff, he knew who I was. So he'd definitely seen me. And I'm like, wow, I just was not vigilant enough with that because he was probably watching. And
I feel like we were pretty good about checking around. Like I was trying to figure out what car he drove. I was trying to find out as much as I could so I could be empowered and be aware. And there were so many pictures from his phone that the police obtained of like me at an apple orchard with a friend. I never saw him. There were times when that day, actually, that I went camping with my friend, the day the PPO was denied, he already had a tracker on my vehicle at that point. And I was camping with a guy friend at this time. And I thought I was going crazy that weekend because I was like under stress. I was thinking this PPO's denied. What am I going to do? But I kept feeling like he was there, that Christopher like was lurking. This was a really small, like 8-site campground on a river. So there weren't people everywhere, but I was very, especially that weekend, I was very like cognizant of what was around. Christopher was like, oh yeah, I came up to that campground. He was like hiding behind somebody's camper or like behind a garbage dumpster, I think he said. And he was like, I was worried because you were spending time with a guy alone. It's like, this is one of my closest friends. Like,
everything he did was to keep her safe. I think his rationale.
This is really like the You show. This is okay. So what exactly though? I mean, because you guys known each other since high school. What is that, like 12 years, 13 years?
We kept track at some point.
Yeah. Facebook always reminds us of.
Yeah, we're all getting
became
older.
friends.
Yeah, we won't do the math. It's more than 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
15 at least.
Yeah. 15 years. Okay. Throughout the course of time, how has your friendship evolved, since before the incident? during the incident and after the incident?
I mean, obviously, as we've gotten older, friendships change as people develop and things like that. But I feel like in terms of the how the friendship, I'll let Robin speak to how the friendship changed, like from the kidnapping on. I feel like a lot. She spent those first few days with me after the abduction and like the aftermath. And so much of that is like I remember different parts about it, but it was like I was almost like blacked out. Like so much of it I just I can't order or don't recall. And she can kind of, and she has some really interesting insights about.
So she was the first person you called, or one of the first people you called?
I don't remember the order in which I called people, but I kind of did it all at once. Like called a bunch of people in a row because initially I was scared for their safety because he hadn't been caught yet. And so I'm thinking, people he may know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like driving up from Chicago and I'm calling friends trying to find someone who would loan me a handgun because like my plan was like to go to a hotel somewhere and just like hide until he was caught. But on the way up, they fortunately arrested him.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I would say in the immediate, it's so interesting to hear Sam say, and she definitely doesn't remember most of that week following because she was so, I think just you're very much in shock. She behaved totally normally. Like the only time that either of us cried was when we watched the arraignment and they denied bond, because I think that's like the first time Sam could go to bed in 10 years without fear of her stalker being out there. So that was a bit of a emotional moment. But other than that,
and they like said my name,
yeah,
or at least my first name it was just a very surreal, like, whoa, this really happened. Yeah. And he's in an orange jumpsuit on this. We watched it.
And there's like a judge saying these big, heavy words like torture.
All of the charges.
Yeah.
And it was just, that was, yeah.
It really made it real. But yeah, she was totally behaved quite normally.
But Robin was just like such a presence during that. Like, what do you do or say? Like,
God gives the strongest battles.
No, don't. Like, there's just nothing. Her presence at that time was really comforting and just like dropping it. Like, nobody knows what to do, and I didn't know what I needed. Like, so much of it was just like.
The one thing was once we got back to her place, she still had duct tape in her hair, like the residue from when he,
taped my whole head
when he got you, and I was like Googling ways to get duct tape out of your hair, but Sam hadn't showered yet. And she was like, there's so much to do. I need to do this. And she was like kind of, I think, distracting her mind a little bit. And I was like, I think you need to just like pause. And she seemed really resistant to doing that. Finally, I think we're watching like a soccer game or something. And then I sat and I like teased all the stuff out of her hair that took forever. And then she showered after that. But that was like,
I had showered. I hadn't washed my hair because I was like, I don't know what to do with my hair.
But it just like it took convincing, I think, to just kind of get her to settle down in the first place. But yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, a lot of it was just like having a presence, and like she was very like, I know that this is different. Like, you would be like, can I hug you? Like, what do you or don't you want me to do? Like, do you want me to sleep in the bed with you? Like, are you scared? Are you like nervous about, like, very attentive to like how things had changed from this whole abduction and assault.
Coming up the stairs.
Yeah, like even knowing people were in my house and hearing the different like squeaks and activity, like I logically understood that, but I was so tense just like hearing doors open and people moving it in my house that I did that morning. It was just very strange, like trying to figure that out and work through that. So she was very, very attentive, and so much of it is just like being present for somebody. Like you don't know what to do, but offering like people that brought groceries over or, different things like that, like super practical, helpful things.
I think
was
one of
great.
the more annoying things that people would do is if there's anything I can do for you, let me know, which one immediately puts the burden back onto the victim. Now Sam has to come up with something, or like she has to be the one to ask once again. Like there would be people who'd say, "What do you want for dinner?" or like, "I made you dinner." Like those things are so much more helpful. And then people would say, "If there's anything I can do for you, let me know." And then Sam would say, "Actually, could you do this?" And then be like, "Oh, well, no, I can't. Like, I'm really busy." There'd be things like that. And it's just like, some people, they're just,
It's like a good intention, but if you leave something that open, you should be prepared to do it if somebody says, or like just putting that responsibility back on somebody, like suggesting like, hey, could I come help clean the house? Or like, can I bring you groceries? Like, it doesn't matter if I don't eat everything you bring, like just showing up for somebody in a way and taking some of that mental burden off is helpful. But yeah, I had a really supportive network, I think, through everything, and given the sentencing and everything legally took so long, it was like a year and a half. Through that whole time of like people being present and kind of checking in and helping out. It really says a lot about their character, because there were people in my life that didn't know what to do or say, or kind of just disappeared, or really I had reached out to for support in different ways and was kind of met with either actual no's or like just no response. And it's like so disheartening on top of like dealing with all of it, to like be vulnerable and ask for help with something and be met in that way, or met with skepticism of like, I just don't know what to say. I didn't know. I never reached out, or
there was
I never
somebody who,
responded.
once the documentary came out, texted Sam and was like, "You reached out to me when this happened, but I didn't really know if I believed it or not. But now I'm so sorry to see this happened to you." And it's like, okay, what do you want Sam to do with that? Like, it's, people can be.
You find out who your real ones are, and you find out who isn't.
Yeah. And life is complicated, and it's hearing you talk about that breaks my heart, just to hear that people weren't there, and even if maybe they had good intentions, it's just, can you give us a playbook? I mean, like, on your way to be there for Samantha, what are you thinking? I mean, are you even nervous? Are you processing through, how can I best be there for her? Or when do you come up with, all right, I'm just gonna be present?
So, well, fortunately, I guess in college, I did a sexual assault advocacy program. So I was actually trained quite thoroughly on how to handle certain situations like this. Kind of uh, someone who's a victim of sexual assault, they've had all of their power taken away. So you don't want to exert power, like, what do you want to do? Like, should we do this? Like kind of letting Sam kind of guide um, next steps, certain things like that. Like, you shouldn't make the person recount the assaults and things like that. Like, I'm not qualified. I'm not a therapist. I'm not qualified to do that. So in terms of how I was going to actually handle the interaction, I wasn't very nervous about. The drive up was mostly, well, to be honest, when Sam called me, the first thing I did was I like sat on the couch for just like in silence for like 10 minutes. And then I was like, I want to go up. But Sam is such a strong, independent person that I genuinely was like, I don't know if she wants anyone there or not. Like, my first thought was classic Sam would probably just want to like be alone and process. But fortunately I asked, and she was like, you can come up if you want. And so then I was like, well, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And then the drive up, I'm trying to get a weapon, and, you're just kind of like not thinking super clearly in that situation. And you're like, genuinely at one point I was like, I hope that Chris shows up at whatever hotel we're at because
Yeah, so Chris.
I would like to so rage. And even like I never had a lot of, I'm not somebody who I feel like in terms of emotions, I have a tendency to feel more sadness than anger. Like if this had happened to Robin, I would have been out in the streets ready to find this guy. Like, and I know that so many of my friends and loved ones had that same rage that I'm like, I totally get it. And I just didn't feel that way. So it was like really interesting to like balance all of that of like, she's trying to be very gentle, but there's this like rage that people are feeling and like trying to support me. And I didn't feel a lot of, I don't know if you noticed a lack of rage, but
so for me, I feel like once I was with you, I genuinely don't think I really thought much about Chris at all. I think that the rage was, when you're in your own thoughts on the drive up, but it just became more about you once I was there, because I honestly, even to this day, I don't think there's been many times where I've just like sat and thought like, oh, I'm so mad at him, because it's just like doesn't really, I don't think about him very much. But yeah, there's a lot of people that were very, very angry. Bonnie. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess last question on friendship specifically. How's it been like from the outside, looking at Samantha's life now and since the incident?
Love this question.
Her therapist asked her to ask her friends how she'd changed in the immediate aftermath, and the first thing I said,
Like such a good friend, Robin says.
she's a lot nicer now.
I thought I was mean to start.
I think she was so right before everything. She was very irritable because of obviously, but from the outside looking in, I think every single time I watch Sam do an interview, I'm just like blown away by how well spoken she is, and she just can articulate her thoughts so well. And I think that's been really awesome to see, because it's just like a whole different side of Sam that I never really saw before, because you're not really in situations where you see that much with your friends. And her capacity for kindness still, like she's been through so much since like the day she was born, and she's still a kind person. Blows my mind. I'd be so jaded about the world.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think, is like just a gratitude for being alive that I think you take for granted unless you have some sort of life-threatening situation where I was convinced I was going to die. No matter what that situation is, I think a lot of times it can give you a different perspective about life. Like the things that are small don't bother you as much anymore. And I think that was definitely something I think that happened with me in terms of like, I'm just happy to be here. Like, I'm just like, yeah. And I think that's a lot of maybe where some of that kindness comes from, like more patience. Things aren't as big of a deal just because I'm like, I'm happy to be here. Like a lot of people don't get that opportunity. And I don't know that there's a day that that's lost on me after all of this. So,
yeah. Well, ladies, take me through Beekeepers. How do you guys come together and decide to start this? And what's talked a little bit about this earlier, but what's the goal, mission? What does it look like in the next couple of years? And what are the things that you guys are attacking?
I think the kind of Sam addressed this earlier, but it is, how can something good come of this? Because it's such an awful thing. To bring purpose to something like that. And as you've seen Sam articulate so well, like she's the perfect survivor in that she's just so good at being able to explain what she went through, the changes that need to happen, and she can kind of taper that emotion and deliver these really impactful statements and have this internal drive that where I think a lot of people, rightfully so, kind of shut down. Sam's able to just kind of power through that. And I think it was the advocacy platform is a really good opportunity for someone in Sam's position, which not many people are, to kind of, take back that narrative and see change. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think stalking is something that leaves victims feeling so powerless that doing something to help bring others power back, whether that's empowering them to tell their own story, advocating for change so that this happens less or that help is easier to access, I think is important. And the fact that it's like driven by a survivor. So many decisions are made by those in power that aren't touched by the topic they're making decisions about. That having that voice in terms of resources available, just the conversation of like, how do you even support somebody? What's helpful in terms of law enforcement or any of this, anything tangential to, what's happened to me. Hearing from survivors is so powerful and can dictate, just because sometimes you just don't know until you've gone through it, or been close to somebody who has, or even from a provider, law enforcement, therapist perspective, it's way different being on the other side. And I think that's something important about something like this, is to get survivors or victims, whatever your preference is, I guess, for the terminology, like involved in some of that decision making and discussion about it. I think it makes people approach things in a different way.
Yeah. So you guys found this organization, was it last year or a couple years ago?
I think maybe even earlier this year. Recently. Definitely not 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, my perspective, every college campus, law enforcement should have you guys for training, because you guys have such good perspective in this. So how do they get a hold of Beekeepers Advocacy?
Yeah. We're at beekeepersadvocacy.org. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just have to make sure that I'm not misspeaking. But there's a contact form on that, and it comes to Robin and I. That's a good way to reach out. A lot of people find me on Instagram or other social media. But I'd say probably our website is the easiest way to get in touch with us. Very interested in doing more. I have a couple upcoming things I'm working with. I won't plug them necessarily because it's still in the works, but working with different community colleges and universities for different speaking engagements or training for police, law enforcement, from like a survivor perspective. But I'm hoping to kind of also do more continuing education on stalking for other social workers, where they can actually get continuing education credits and learn about stalking and supporting survivors and more clinical details. But yeah, that's how you can get in touch with us. Would love to continue doing more speaking, panels, conversation, those types of things with relevant stakeholders in the public.
Yeah. Last question for the both of you, a two-sided question. Samantha, any last words that you'd want to say to survivors? And Robin, as a friend supporting a survivor, any last advice for friends that are close to survivors?
I think each situation is so different. My overarching message, I think, to people is to not give up hope. You can be in some really dark places and things can change. Don't give up hope. Don't stop trying. Each day is a new day. I think is my biggest advice. Simple, but reach out for help. Don't be silent. Tell somebody, get help.
For me, I would say be present. Just because this happened a month ago doesn't mean it's not still haunting that person every single day. Like, so I feel like so much outreach happens in the first week, and then, that tapers off, and then years go by, and, you don't hear from anyone anymore because it's like, oh, well, enough time has passed. This person's healed, and that's not really how healing works. So being present in that way. Also, just in terms of preventing this type of thing from happening, it's not just on the person being stalked to protect themselves. I think, like, if you watch the documentary, there's a part where the police are talking to one of Christopher's friends, and they're like, does this surprise you? Or like, did you know that Chris like was obsessed with Sam, something like that? And he was like, oh yeah, like we all knew, like this definitely happened. And it's like, okay, well, that early intervention from your friends from that side can make a huge impact as well. If you're seeing somebody who's just really hung up on someone, it's kind of displaying these really obsessive type patterns, be a good friend and say something to them like, hey, maybe you should talk to somebody about this and kind of work out why you can't get over this person, things like that. Like, there's a lot of people along the way that kind of saw this dangerous pattern in Chris and seemingly didn't really do anything about it.
And sometimes there's not a lot you can do. I
Mhm.
acknowledge that. But yeah, it's not just about, I hear so much like, I'm sharing this with my sister, my daughter, and it's not always a gendered, it happened, like men are stalked too, but so much of it is more that women are the victims, twice as likely. But it's also about how do we care about everybody? Because if we're protecting one woman, that perpetrator is going to find somebody else. So like, how do we prevent this from happening in the get-go? And a lot of it is about mental health. And I think there's a stigma if we're talking about a male being a perpetrator and a female being a victim, which isn't always the case. But how do we get men talking more about mental health? I think this probably could have been avoided had he had more assistance back in college, maybe talked with somebody, had more help. Things could have been different, I imagine.
There was a talk that Sam just gave, and one of the women there was talking about how her and her husband filed for divorce, and she was so heartbroken about it. And, like, through a lot of heartbreak is where a lot of, I feel like, obsession can come. And she developed a lot of really unhealthy patterns around her husband. And then she finally had a friend step in and say, hey, this is too much. You need to back off. And she said just that voice alone was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I was just so in my head about everything. I didn't even realize like the severity of the actions I was taking. And I feel like that also kind of speaks a lot about women are much more comfortable confiding in each other than I think men are about serious things like that. But it does work. That's an example. Like, that was intervention early that could have stopped something more troubling from happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, ladies, thank you so much for doing this interview. I definitely learned a lot, and was definitely inspired by the work that both of you guys are doing through Beekeepers Advocacy. And as they said, if you have any questions or if you want to know how to reach out to them, go on their website. Better that than probably contacting them on social media. Make sure you just fill out the contact form and reach out to them and to see how they can be of service to your community, college, or law enforcement, or whatever service provider that you are.
After our interview, we grabbed a taxi and went to get lunch. As I hung out with Samantha and Robin, one word kept echoing in my mind: authenticity. The way they spoke to each other, laughed with each other, they were real. They accepted each other and everyone around them for exactly who they were. I came to Chicago wanting to learn more about their story, but somewhere in between the conversation and the quiet moments, they turned it around and wanted to know mine. That's what struck me most: their ability to connect, to listen, and to make space for someone else's story. And maybe that's what true healing really looks like. When we allow others the freedom not to be okay. Samantha and Robin will change many lives, not because they've mastered recovery, but because they embody what this world and survivors need most: authentic care. I hope you keep up with them through Beekeepers as I will. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more Invest in Nate stories.